Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Joshua Sain.
My name is Jacob Lehman.
Patrick Reed.
And Jen Zong.
We'd like to thank you for taking the time out of your day to hear our recommendation for the Latin American Youth Center. So, in short, we recommend that you capitalize on the markets of your existing programs, specifically promoter pathways and positive youth development. We recommend that with the increased revenue that you would earn, that you develop a volunteer coordination strategy to streamline your volunteer processing. We also recommend that you achieve self-sufficiency with your promoter pathway and positive youth development, feeding the revenue back into the operating revenue of the Latin American Youth Center. We've created a brief timeline for the ease of your understanding. So immediately, we recommend that you license promoter pathways and utilize Impacto Consulting to manage these new revenue ventures. In 6 months, we recommend that you increase your staff, establish a volunteer coordinator position as well as a programming position to externalize positive youth development. In 2.5 years, we see a partnership forming with Georgetown University offering a continuing education unit, and you would simultaneously phase out the positive youth development program. In 3.5 years, establish a dedicated volunteer department, so intern positions, supervisory positions, and at the same time you'd start leveraging the success of these programs to increase foundational grants. And then 4.5 years, you expanding Impacto Consulting and bank on the revenue that it's earning to increase your mission. So as it stands, based on the opportunities we've identified, we've kind of created 3 main goals to pursue. So we'd like to diversify revenue, create a sophisticated system for volunteer tracking, and combine positive youth development, promoter pathways, and Impacto Consulting for a best practice replication unit. As it stands, there are some potential assets that we could utilize. The volunteer base of between 5 and 30 students and about 70 community members could be used to improve on this venture. As of right now, there's no standardized mechanism to track and train them. So that's one opportunity. There's also positive youth development, which is competitive amongst other training programs. It takes into account cultural competency, and it's already been shown that there's interest amongst organizations such as schools, after-school programs, who would like to adopt this program. The barriers that we've identified in implementing this are our funding and clear business plan. And now I'll turn it over to Patrick for our objectives.
So the first key objective is we want to capitalize on successful programs, specifically promoter pathways, in order to create base capital so we can fund pipeline programs down the road. This includes expanding the market of existing programs as a means of attaining this capital. So first, by licensing promoter pathways, we can ensure a degree of expanded market. It's one of the few pieces of trademarked IP that LAYC has on hand, so we can use that as a short-term means of increasing revenue. We function as seed capital for a couple of initial staff investments. First, we develop a volunteer coordinator who will manage the volunteer program. Second, excuse the typo, it says 2 volunteer coordinators, just 1. And also 3 trainers for the pilot program, the PYD program, that would be used for training cohorts within LAYC. There are a couple of empirical studies that show we can get short-term returns in early replication. Celia yesterday during her question and answer session mentioned that California and Oregon were 2 initial targets that are part of the current development of promoter pathways. We also identified 3 key city demographics that we'd be able to expand into because they had similar demographics to Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, Dallas, and San Francisco. Our second objective is to increase staff and diversify revenue by using this base capital as a means of kickstarting this development. So as part of the volunteer coordinating plan, our short-term goal from year 0 to 4 is to have 1 permanent staff member who oversees the technology and operations of the volunteer program. What they would oversee is a volunteer tracking program. And it uses data collection in order to record contact information of past volunteers, their skills, their availability, and their performance. They could use this as a talent base from which to draw future volunteers and ensure that instead of recruiting volunteers on an ad hoc basis, they have an already listed matrix that shows past volunteers who would be willing to participate. We would conduct a yearly self-audit of contact information to ensure the information is up to date and ensure that there is always a volunteer base that they can draw from. After year 4, we want to expand the department into 3 permanent staff: a director, technology and operations, who would run this volunteer matrix, and an outreach coordinator who's responsible for retaining new talent. And with that, I want to move on to Jen Zong, who's going to talk about the PYD rollout.
So as Patrick has mentioned earlier, there is an expressed interest within our PYD modeling and how you've created your own salsa. But specifically what makes you marketable is the fact that you've overcome 3 critical issues that have been expressed within a youth development organization in terms of a study done in the early 2000s on the critical issues. So it's what features to input to increase the capacity of your organization, the resources that are needed to expand the accessibility of inputs and sort of go to the key demographics across many different types of community, and what sustains your program and the program of your attention and the commitment of it all. So in terms of LAYC, you specifically have 10 years of data that you've been able to expand on, and that's allowed you to create a measured evaluation and customize a curriculum for your own organization and create a cultural competency and creating your own salsa specifically. And you've been able to have a measured evaluation over 7 different services and multiple different programs. So the thing is, why does that make you marketable? That you have a certain expertise in this area that you can leverage to other nonprofit organizations. These nonprofit organizations may not have not found their own salsa. Specifically, there's a sustainable market in the sense that in DC alone, there's 916 nonprofits that are working in youth development. If you choose to expand more nationally, there are 36,900 U.S. nonprofits working in youth development itself. So in the phase 1 of PYD, in the months of 6 to 30, you should market PYD to other youth development nonprofits directly, specifically since you have the expertise in Washington, D.C. on the demographics in the Latino community and African American community, which are your key demographics. So the first thing, your PYD staff would work with the organization to learn their corporate culture and develop their salsa for them. Your PYD staff would implement and facilitate this customized training. There would be a 6-person PYD staff split into 2 teams specifically. An internal PYD staff that will train and coordinate your current onboard staff at LAYC, and then an external PYD staff that trains the cohorts of other organizations. In terms of pricing specifically in this phase 1 of PYD and customizing other people's salsa, is that there's a total cost per cohort at $7,630, assuming that each trainer contributes 90 hours to preparation and training. And the proposed price from 12 to 14 participants is $849 per participant, and then at a discounted rate of $749 participants if the organization chooses to send 15 participants. I'll turn it over to Jacob to talk about the revenue analysis in the short term.
Yeah, thank you. So at the 2.5-year timeline, we predict that exporting PYD in the short term will approximate about $160,000 in revenue. I'll point out that the cost of extended employee hours for both the volunteer and the external PYD staff, we plan to hire 3 extra. This is actually a bit more than the net revenue from PYD, but then I will point out that this is a conservative estimate for net revenue over the short term because we're also expecting revenue from Promoter Pathway, which we estimate will compensate for the extended employee hours. I'll turn it back over to Jen for the second rollout of the pathway.
So specifically for phase 2 is that at this point in the months of 30 to 48, you want to create a partnership with Georgetown for a certification of youth development, specifically a CEU and continuing education unit provided to graduates of a CYD program. In this phase, you want to transition out of your PYD where you are going to organizations, talking to their staff, figuring out their salsa for them, and at this stage, teaching them how to find their own salsa. This is mainly because you don't have the staffing capacity to keep up with all the demands. This way you can actually teach other people to expand on their own salsa and figure out their own salsa. Working with Georgetown specifically will create a credibility to your program. It'll create legitimacy and also help you market the program itself. So the pricing we estimate is $5,250 per student for that tuition rate. The hosting of the university would be a free of charge. The proposed cost per person would be for 12 to 14 participants is $800 per participant. I'll turn it back over to Jacob and talk about our long-term goals.
Thank you. So utilizing this partnership with Georgetown plus streamlining our volunteer program, we'll be able to utilize this to capitalize on new partnerships to achieve self-sufficiency. So our first long-term strategy is, once again, as Jen mentioned, the CYD program. The tuition from this should cover administrative and personnel costs from both volunteer staff we're hiring and for staff for CYD. And we expect a profit margin as well. The second strategy is we'll be able to expand on foundation funding through the program success of CYD. We'll be able to grow LAYC's credibility with both local and national donors. We will be able to position LAYC as a leader in the community for creating new programs and cultural competence. And our third long-term strategy is reinstating impacted consulting. So first, this is just supposed to overview CYD, but we actually expect impacted consulting we'll be able to leverage to create other programs to export our 7 core services into training modules for other
Thank you, team
organizations.
4.5. We'll now transition into our 10-minute Q&A session.
Sorry, okay, I might be a little bit confused, but could you elaborate on the pricing strategy that you have for PYD Phase 2? Because here it says the cost that it's gonna cost you is gonna be $5,250 per student, but you're proposing to charge only $800 per participant? That seems like quite a...
So we are actually charging $5,250 based on what Georgetown already charges for certification programs.
So we're charging them $5,250, and the cost per participant through us is $800 per participant. So the pricing itself was based on the current nonprofit management executive certificate program at Georgetown University. This specifically helps leadership and management capacity. Their tuition is at $5,250 per person at a 48-hour within 9 days from 9 to 5. So a proposal of 72 hours in total contribution, and that we think that this is actually potentially this would be a good model to sustain or to model after our tuition, because it's a similar program with similar objectives. However, our program would specifically be targeting people that are working in youth development and finding more of their salsa and how to work with youth, whereas this is more of a nonprofit management executive in general, so it's non-competitive to a degree.
Okay, so what is like the cost to you to do this program?
Well, it scales up. So the $800, for example, is a scalar metric for how much it's going to cost the organization per additional participant that goes into the CEU program. So that's going to scale to 12 to 15 participants depending on how large the program is at the time. Because it grows to 15 participants by 4.5 years, but starts at 12 participants at year 2.5.
When you say the organization, do you mean LAYC, or do you mean the clients that they're reaching out to?
In which context?
For the pricing, the 800, is that we get the scaling pricing, or we are charging them the scaling pricing?
No, we are scaled at 800 per additional participant, but it's 5,200 per outside organization who comes in to use the program per participant.
So the last slide that we didn't get to shows the revenue projections for the next 4 years. Correct?
Mm-hmm.
Now, is this the only revenue diversification strategy you have in place to this organization, where that is one of the key issues that they're trying to address?
It's one of the key issues we want to address. However, we've been conservative in our numbers by assuming that we would have to pay the staff for overtime, because the training for PYD takes about 90 hours. So we're assuming that we want to pay for them for this overtime. 2, the data for Promoter Pathway, which is already currently trademarked and being sold right now, the pricing is not made public. So we have not included that into our revenue stream. We're working under the assumption that it will help create the seed money and sustain the other parts of our costs.
Okay. How would this directly impact their current spread of their revenue dependency, where a majority or a significant percentage of their current revenue is coming from government funding? How much impact would this have in their overall diversification of revenue over the next 4 years?
So what we get in the context of is, at the beginning it's government donors is the primary bulk of where our revenue comes in from. The idea is that once the CEU program gets off the ground, we can market it as legitimate to other private organizations like foundations who recognize the success of the CEU program and be willing to put money into the program. We'd also be willing to use the consulting arm of Impacto to use the success of the CEU program, or the CYD program, that's the certificate for youth development we do through Georgetown, use that as a success story through which they can market to other nonprofits that this is a successful nonprofit they've been able to turn around, and they've been able to do similar success in replicating using other nonprofits' program models, like training modules, to replicate that to other organizations. So it's teaching other nonprofits how to teach their nonprofit modules.
The key success of LAYC so far is that you guys have a great success rate in terms of throughout your 7 services. You've had 427 students receive an average of 52 hours. And all these stats, these are stats that you want to help replicate, but you're also needing to create a legitimacy and creating more expertise and collecting more data before you can truly have a consulting arm, which has been a long-term goal of yours as Impacto Consulting. In addition to increasing your legitimacy and reducing dependency on government funding, is we want to start targeting other foundation funding, specifically Michael and Susan Dell Foundation, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and Google. These three organizations specifically have very similar mission statements in their philanthropy arm. Michael and Susan Foundation, they want to work in urban poverty that threaten their minds, bodies, and hopes. You have 7 services that target education, targets their well-being, community well-being, and targets their abilities to have a healthy lifestyle. That's also something Melinda and Gates Foundation wants to work on, specifically in the U.S. They want to work in the Bay Area in terms of post-secondary degree and ensuring students graduating from high school, and then it can change on a broader scale. You have a lot of models and a lot of data that you can definitely market to them and create but you need more data to ensure that your PYD program works, because your promoter pathway program right now is still in its pilot program. So within those 4.5 years, you want to create more data analytics to ensure that this is a sustainable program and it has success rates before you can really target these larger foundations for funding. And then Google itself in the Bay Area wants to create a career pathway, which is something that your promoter pathway currently does. Is there additional questions on that, or is that good enough? Is that clarification?
Okay, thank you.
Could you elaborate on, so I understand what you're saying is that LAYC needs additional credibility via this new program in order to obtain this foundation funding. If they already have the efforts to outcome metrics in place, why can't they go for the funding earlier as opposed to after they develop the new program? I mean, do you think that LAYC can't stand on its own feet to apply for these grants now?
No, I believe they definitely can. I think that but then you also have to consider that there is a lot of different nonprofits that are trying to go for this. So if we don't succeed in the first term in gaining that grant, I think within over time, you're able to create more legitimacy and prove to them that your models and your metrics have been proven successful. Because you started 10 years ago on your metrics, but however your promoter pathway is only in its pilot program now. That specific program needs more data, and that is what would play into the Bay Area, because it is specifically your career pathway program. So that just needs more time to develop.
And a follow-up on the career program, would you be tracking the outcomes of the students that you have that go through the certification program and start their own nonprofits and implement the PYD program? Would you be evaluating their outcomes as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Is the current data analytics you use, the ETO, does do all that. It's something that actually Michael, Susan, and Dell Foundation also uses to determine whether the grantees are reaching a sustainable and scalable success rate of performance data. So you have people that are trained in this analytics, unlike many nonprofits. So that's definitely something you can leverage as your expertise, and that's definitely something you want to apply. It's already something that's applied to all your different services, but you want to expand it into certification, expand it to promoter pathway, and expand it to PYD.
Do you guys have any sort of like projected financial analysis numbers just for the volunteer infrastructure that you're going to implement?
There are numbers for the volunteer infrastructure in terms of what the volunteers are going to generate on a cost per basis. However, we expect that the money that we get from the licensing from PP initially would be enough to cover at least one additional volunteer coordinator, and then use the revenue that we would generate through the CEU coordination program with Georgetown in order to fund 2 more volunteer members over 4.5 years. However, there isn't a cost comparison for how much an additional volunteer would be. They didn't seem like they were too worried about it in terms of retaining recruitment or the value or the vetting process. It seems like one of the largest institutional problems that we were seeing was a degree of organization and management of the volunteer program. So we want to make sure that we put a trackable system in place that can keep track of their recruitment pool.
Sorry. Yeah, she said specifically that she wanted, and during the Q&A session, she wanted specifically a volunteer basis and infrastructure immediately, whether it's just a standardized program, because they have so many different types of volunteers, they don't keep track of their volunteers. So she just wanted something that was more concrete than they have right now, because they don't keep track of the different types of volunteers they have, the different skill sets their volunteers have. They don't have a problem in reaching the community. They have plenty of people that want to volunteer. It's sort of more organizing the data of those volunteers itself.
So how would you organize that data?
So it's organized through the contact matrix. It's basically it's a database that would be retained at LAYC that keeps track of contact information that can ensure to reach out to an existing pool of past volunteers instead of ad hoc reaching out, like they were saying, through social media over to FAP in order to bring in new volunteers. Also keep tracks of their skills to ensure that they know that volunteers who help for healthcare programs or education programs can be utilized for those needs.
That concludes our 10-minute Q&A session. So we'll now transition into the final remarks and conclusion.
Okay. So just recapping the timeline, there are a lot of interworking parts in this component of our recommendation, so I want to make sure we broke it down through the timeline in a relatively understandable way. Immediately at the outset, we start 2 programs. First, we license Promoter Pathway to a couple of key demographics. This includes Los Angeles, Dallas, and San Francisco. Second, we begin utilizing Impactive Consulting as an umbrella organization within LAYC to oversee Positive Youth Development Programs and Promoter Pathways program. They would be in charge of making sure that we can market both of these effectively. By 6 months, we use the seed money that we got from Promoter Pathways licensing in order to increase our staff. This includes 1 volunteer coordinator who's in charge of keeping track of the matrix, as well as 3 additional staff for PYD who do the external teaching. So there's the internal PYD staff who teach within LAYC, and there are those that teach the cohorts who come to LAYC to learn about how to find their own salsa. By 2.5 years, we begin phasing out this direct development, because by having your own staff who teach cohorts their salsa, that doesn't scale very well. So we wanted to transition into a partnership with Georgetown to ensure that instead of teaching the cohorts who come in with their salsa we teach organizational leaders how to find their own salsa. So we can ensure that we can scale a lot more easily than retaining a bunch of staff who try to do significant amounts of time investment into researching corporate culture as well as their effectiveness. This also, that includes also phasing out the PYD program, so we can transition the staff who do the external PYD program originally into teaching at Georgetown as part of this new CYD, Certificate for Youth Development program at Georgetown. By year 3.5, we use the revenue that we get from the Georgetown program to start building out our volunteer department. This includes a director, a technology and ops volunteer who would be in charge of maintaining the matrix and the database of volunteers, and finally an outreach coordinator who's in charge of recruitment and retaining new talent. By year 4.5, ideally, Impactive Consulting is going to be in the black, and we can expand the operations to other nonprofit wings, because we feel one of the competitive edges of Impactive Consulting is not just bringing salsa to other organizations, but teaching other organizations how to export their training modules, which we feel we have an advantage over other nonprofit organizations.
So specifically, we want to target the 3 key objectives and 3 goals you wanted to expand the market of existing programs for Promoter Pathway and PYD directly into the market directly through a certification partnership with Georgetown. And then the second objective, developing volunteer coordination strategy, where you streamline your volunteer programs through a focus of data collection and analytics, and then which eventually becomes a long-term creation of a department. And finally, your long-term objective is to achieve self-sufficiency. So by diversifying your revenue through CYD, new relationships with the foundations, Promoter Pathway, and Impactive Consulting, which will be your arm that will feed in a surplus of revenue into LAYC and create a self-sustaining arm of the Impactive Consulting itself. Because as a nonprofit, you're not looking to gain profit. You're trying to gain a surplus so you can, to go into your core mission statement of empowering low-income youth. You want to be helping your idea. You want to go national so you can get a better national funding. But your key objective is not to competing with other nonprofits, because your key objective is to empower other youth. So as that is your social mission, you want to be helping other nonprofits to replicate your success rates that you have been proving over time in the last 10 years. And that is our conclusion. Thank you so much.